may I ask you a quick question? Let's say I have transaction. We are very close to the escrow, July 14. However, the ABC license has not been issued the permanent yet, only the temporary license issued. The seller said he will not give the buyer the business unless he got the money, and the buyer say he need to get the business because of the ABC license temporary issue has been issued. How do you handle this situation, please?
You know, that's a great question. And I don't have an answer for you because I don't do a lot of work with ABC licenses. So does anybody else on the call happen to have any information that might be helpful for Diane in terms of transferring liquor licenses in because quite honestly, Diane, I would be talking to my escrow company because they transfer those all the time. So I would get their, I would be talking to them and asking them how best it would be, how to best handle things and see what their opinion was on it.
You are correct. That's a very excellent advice. Unfortunately, this escrow, they are not familiar with the ABC license. That's why.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if you have, the buyer has a temporary license, but technically, my understanding was always that escrow could not close until the permanent license was issued in California. But that again, that's that's why I would check with escrow. So because most sellers are not going to want to turn over their business to somebody until escrow can actually close and they get the money that they've been paid for the business. Because if the buyer does something stupid and burns the business to the ground, what happens? So, I mean, I would check with two things. Are the buyer's funds already in escrow, like 100%?
Yes, yes, yes.
So buyer's funds are in escrow. I mean, in theory, the seller could continue or could allow the buyer to come in with the seller to operate the business. But I mean, if I'm just standing in the seller's shoes, I don't think I'm willing to turn over my business until escrow closes. Because what happens if escrow doesn't close? What happens if, something happens in the business, escrow doesn't actually close and buyer says, hey, I want my money back because all the buyer's funds are now in escrow.
The seller suggested the buyer gave him one portion of the money, and if the escrow not closed, that money is non-refundable, and the buyer refused. So now I'm thinking, I have to think this morning, as you said, business broker as a solver problem. So I have to think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, when are you anticipating that the permanent liquor license will be issued?
I just talked to them. They said 6 days from today. Approximately 6 days.
Approximately 6 days. So, but like in a week?
Yes, yes.
So then just close in a week. I mean, I don't know. That's, if it was 60 days, then that would be different. If you're looking 2 months down the road and buyer wants to take possession or something, but if it's only a week, it's like, okay, buyer, you just need to be patient until we can close, and then you can, then the seller will turn over the keys to you.
But the seller permit will be discontinued by July 14. He cannot go under his permit anymore.
As of the 14th.
Yes, that's correct.
But the buyer has a temporary permit.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah, so buyer and seller need to work together so that if seller's permit expires on the 14th, buyer comes in and they're working together until it closes for the other 2 or 3 days until it closes, until escrow closes. They just work together so that there's a valid permit, a valid liquor license, even whether it's temporary or not. I mean, I think buyer and seller, so the seller can start training early. I mean, normally the training period doesn't start until after escrow closes. So the buyer can start coming in and, you know, seller can, today's the 10th. So, you know, on the 14th or the 13th or whatever, buyer can come in and start doing the training. And then they close as soon as escrow can close. But escrow should have, I mean, if all the funds are in escrow right now, then escrow should have a closing amendment that basically says they're going to close as soon as the permanent liquor license is issued, and that it's an irrevocable instruction to go ahead and disperse funds after that. And so that way, if buyer and seller both sign off on that, then the buyer can't turn around and change their mind. So the funds are all there, irrevocable instruction, and, you know, then they just work together so that there's a valid license there until escrow closes. And then seller can finish the training and walk away.
Thank you, Tanya. Just in case, if the buyer want to hold his money due to the training, he told me he doesn't trust the seller. Is he allowed to hold partial of his payment until he receive his training completely? Tanya, can he do that?
Not really. I mean, how much training is there supposed to be?
2 weeks, please.
2 weeks? So I mean, generally you're not going to have an escrow holdback for that. Escrow might take a day or two before they disperse funds. It is part of the contract for the seller to train the buyer. So if the buyer feels, you know, maybe that's another reason to have the buyer go ahead and start working with the seller, start the training early while they're waiting for the permanent license. Because that should alleviate some of the buyer's fears as well. They'll get they'll get a week of training or a few days of training. So that 2-week period is already, you know, they'll get into the business and start seeing things.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it is. It makes sense. Thank you so much for your advice, Tanya. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.